Vanakkam, friends. This is AR Arun. I am President of the Southern India Chamber of Commerce and Industry, SICCI. On behalf of SICCI, I would like to extend a warm welcome to our esteemed guest of today, Mr. M.K. Narayanan. I would also like to welcome each one of you to our session 22 of SICCI 360 that we are conducting today. I would like to wish each one of you a very good evening. As most of you would be aware, SICCI has been conducting several programs of interest to each one of its stakeholders. And during these programs, we have had several guests join us and address us. Invariably, our guests limit their address to just the area of expertise. We, however, felt that our guests have much more to offer than just the area of expertise. That is how we came up with the concept of SICCI 360. We felt that during each one of these sessions, each of our guests have much more to offer, sharing with us their all-round paths to success. A few more words about SICCI 360 that you see on your slide in front of you. But before I go over this slide, I would like to draw your attention to the names and numbers of two of our executives listed in the bottom of this slide. Please make note of it. And if any of you have any problem connecting during the course of today's call, please give our executives a call and we'll be glad to assist you. As I was saying, SICCI 360 is a recent foray for us, building on the experience of our seminars. We wanted to give it a name that depicts a multidimensional perspective because that's what each one of our programs are. We orient our programs as a lively discussion with our eminent guests, our guests who are experts in their field and who share with us their all-round path to excellence. The criteria that we have to invite our guests is quite stringent. We typically look for guests with over 4 decades of experience in their respective industry as well as society contribution. SICCI 360 is, of course, an apolitical platform. The format that we follow during the SICCI 360 series is that of 5 distinct sections that we discuss with our esteemed guests. We talk about our guests' expertise. We then go on to our guests' organization and their role within their organization. We then talk about our guests' career path. Fourth, we talk about our guests' inputs for the next generation. And finally, we talk about our guests' inputs for society. We would certainly like to encourage you, the audience, to participate with us. Please feel free to share with us your thoughts, suggestions, and feedback, and we'll be glad to address it during the course of today's call. With that, I would now like to share a few words about Mr. M.K. Narayanan, our esteemed guest for today. He was born in 1934 and completed his schooling at the Madras Christian College, Higher Secondary School. He later graduated from our Loyola College in Chennai. He joined the Indian Police Service in 1955 and passed with highest marks. He went on deputation to the Intelligence Bureau in February 1959. Most of his career has been spent under the government of India, mainly in IB. He headed IB from 1987 to 1990, and before heading the Joint Intelligence Committee for a year. He also became chief of IB, having a 4-star rank, which is equivalent to the Army General, again in 1991, and he later retired in 1992. He was appointed Special Advisor, which is a non-civil service appointment, for internal security to the Prime Minister of India in May 2004. He was India's National Security Advisor with the rank of Minister of State from 2005 to 2010. He has played a significant role in the landmark Indo-US Civil Nuclear Agreement, which we will hope to discuss during the course of today's conversation. Mr. Narayanan has also been Governor of West Bengal, the 24th Governor of West Bengal, from 2010 to 2014. He has been awarded the Padma Shri in 1992 for civil services. With those few words, I would now like to take the opportunity to welcome Mr. Narayanan again to today's event. Mr. Narayanan, wishing you a very good evening. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you, Arun. That's a very impressive resume of my career. I only want to say that I feel like a fish out of water because this is a forum basically of what you call specialists in the field of industry and whatnot. And mine has been an entirely different area. I'll do my best. I hope I can manage the questions that you're going to ask me.
The reason why we found it very relevant, Mr. Narayan, is because you are a specialist in geopolitical discussion. You've also experienced significant areas and developed your own expertise. which has an impact on how industry pans out in the course of time, which is why it becomes very important to be able to spend the time and understand this. With that, you joined the police service in 1955, and within 3 years, you were on deputation to IB. When we look at the police service and we look at IB, both relate to security and peace. What differentiates one from the other?
It's a degree of specialization, basically. The Indian Police Service encompasses almost all fields of what we call security of a certain kind. Intelligence is a specialty. All police services cannot function without intelligence. But when you need to sort of hone your skills in intelligence to deal with a wider variety of problems rather than merely law issue, you need special knowledge. The Intelligence Bureau, I mean, for the, I say, the understanding of your audience, is the second oldest intelligence organization in the world. I mean, the MI6 of Great Britain was probably the first identified. I mean, there were always, intelligence has always been, whenever the world has existed, intelligence has always been. But in modern day nomenclature, as intelligence organization, there, the MI6 is the oldest, the Intelligence Bureau is perhaps the second oldest. And we celebrated our centenary in 1988. The organization was set up exactly 100 years ago. So if you ask me what is the link between the Intelligence Bureau and the IB? The IB is what I call the distilled essence of intelligence work that we do in here. If you want short answer, that's the shortest answer I could think of.
When you first stepped into the intelligence arena, what were some of the major challenges that were facing our nation at that point of time? And can you also share with us what you might think of some of the wars that we never ever fought?
That's a rather tall order. But when I joined the Intelligence Bureau in 1959, I think communism, or the specter of communism, was the biggest threat as far as we were concerned, and perhaps to some extent across the world. And prior to that, we had seen a great deal of insurgencies of one kind. We had the major struggle in Telangana, not a separate Telangana agitation, but the Telangana uprising. Bengal had also witnessed a whole series of most of these were dominated by leftists or other communist parties. So I would say communism was the biggest single threat, probably worldwide, and definitely as far as India is concerned. And many of us, therefore, when they joined the Intelligence Bureau, went into the communist list. And I think I spent most of my life in that area, at least in the first 10, 15 years.
You were the National Security Advisor during the Bombay terror attack, which devastated the entire country and perhaps the world as well. Can you share with us what you encountered?
Why did you choose my worst moment in my career to highlight so early in the talk? The Bombay terror attack, I want to, you will allow me a little elaboration. So my 2 minute answers that I've been doing.
Sure.
In 2007, or I would say 2008, we had just signed the Indo-US nuclear deal, which was across the world seen as a very remarkable deal because we had broken many, many years of apartheid that we had been facing. And nobody ever expected that the United States and the rest of the Western world would allow us to with a deal of that kind. While I was basking the glory because I was one of the persons involved in that, it's almost like a hero becoming a zero. Because one moment we've been praised, next moment with the terror attack, it was almost as if I was one of the 10 people who carried out the attack. This was a very diabolical plan which was created by the Pakistan's ISI. This was not a work of any individual terrorist group. This was masterminded by Pakistan's ISI. Prior to that, they created a whole set of layer upon layer of what you call Indian Mujahideen involvement, softening the Indian state to some extent. We had to manage to get over. So this was, the training was done by the Pakistan Army, to some extent helped by the Pakistani Navy, because they came by boats from across the mothership, they got into smaller ship, then into Fiji. I mean, it was almost like an army operation, it was almost like a Normandy landing or something. Yes, it was certainly a case of failure. We had some information that something was being planned, but we did not have the specific details which would have enabled us to. We knew that an attack on Bombay was expected, but we were not very clear how exactly it would be perpetrated. Protection of the hotels and etc., all of them which were attacked subsequently were ensured, but nobody nearly saw that people would come and really fire them. Everybody was looking for a kind of a more terror groups coming in, trying to put a place of bomb, etc., etc. In the event, we were caught unawares, there's no denying. It was unfortunate that there was much more detail with our allies, like the American intelligence and the CIA had more detail because they had penetrated the vitals of the organization. So they had little more information, but they refused to share that because manual supply, they didn't want him to be doing testing brought out. So if that had been possible, we might have done much better. But in short, it was a really awakening call for us. We found that our Coast Guard party was weak. More so that the National Security Guard, while they were very well trained, they did not have adequate, what could we call it, air power, etc., to reach its point. Right. So much of the damage was done within the first 67 hours, which could have been saved if we had. Since then, we have set up hubs in various places, etc., etc. So, in some ways, it was one of our worst moments. In many ways, I think it was been an awakening. And I think after that, we have managed to keep away from similar problems.
Intelligence failures definitely happen even in developed countries. There are instances where it happens even in the US, where we've encountered 9/11. But coming back to India, have we now fixed that scenario where those lapses, whatever we encountered, we've now fixed it and it's now watertight?
I think intelligence failures will exist as long as society exists. I mean, I think there's never going to be a case. It's a question of how do you learn from one intelligence failure to prevent the next one. What you do manage to do is you can avoid a plethora of failures. But to say that you will avoid an intelligence failure, that will never happen. Because human ingenuity is one. And then you prevent 10 attacks. And the 11th one goes. It's like in many other things. So I don't think that you can say that you will prevent anything. The United States may claim that after 9/11, that they have main advantage that the United States have is basically everybody has to come in by sea. So they're also insulated in many ways from that. Take a country like India with so many land borders, etc., coming across it. And because we are the land borders, we didn't pay adequate attention to the sea to that extent. So when you say will there be no future intelligence failure? Certainly not. Is there any country immune from an intelligence failure? Again, no.
Moving on to the Indo-US civil nuclear deal, you were also involved with that. There were about 123 agreements that we signed with the US, and there was.
So it's called the 123 agreement.
123
123 is only, it is one single agreement. Nomenclature of the record. It is a 123, the 1, 2, but it's a critical agreement in the process.
There was a lot of criticism that the agreements never had the required approval process within the political stakeholders, that they were not consulted. But now we are more than 15 years away from when we had first signed those agreements. Do you think we have achieved what we needed to achieve?
I think pardon me if I spend a little more time on this, because I think it's important, and I think it's important particularly for what did the India-US nuclear deal achieve? It removed what I could call the nuclear apartheid that exists. The world over looks at what is the cheapest form of energy. And despite all that we are talking of energy from the sun, so that solar energy and other kind of, nuclear energy probably will be the most sustaining. The point is, part of the problem is talking to some people right now. It's been a cloistered area. Government has kept it. That's why we can't even the monoxide sands that we are having in Kerala and whatnot, we can't use because it's all treated as rare earths and therefore you can't. So nuclear power was crucial for India, and that is how the India-US nuclear deal came about. When the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Manmohan Singh, went to to New York, on his first visit as Prime Minister in 2004, he met up with Mr. Bush, the younger Bush. And President Bush asked him a question, in what way can we help you? And so, there was a time when we didn't have grain and we had a PL 480, etc., etc. Mr. Manmohan Singh said, there's one thing. You must help us with our energy needs. And because we are deficient in oil, coal is a polluting, it hasn't become such a big issue, but still is polluting. And therefore, we are at tender mercy. And at that time, oil was, I think, 25 or 30 dollars a barrel. He said it may go up to 40 or 50, not knowing that it's going to skyrocket. So, between the two, they decided they will do something about nuclear. And at that time, we were facing all kinds of sanctions. So that's how the whole deal started. So I won't go through unless you want whole meeting, the whole meeting on nuclear. I would not tell you all that happened. But there were so many impediments that were put in the way led by the United States, but the entire world, Western world, with the possible exception of Russia, had all these Russia and France. And these all the choke points. And you can't do this, and you can't do that, and you can't trust you, and we can't do that. So that's how the nuclear deal was thought of. Now, I don't think anybody objected to the nuclear deal. But at that point, one stakeholder was the Marxist Party, which was an ally of the UPA at that time. And they have anything to do with the Americans was anything to do with them. So they protested, they raised a really objection. There were people in the main constituent, the Congress also, who were not very comfortable there because they saw this as part of an alignment with the United States. So it's not that any of the stakeholders had any objection, but they felt, are we going closer to the Americans? Am I clear?
Yes.
Yeah.
So maybe a little louder, sir.
Okay.
Or else we can adjust the mic.
Yeah.
Maybe the microphone, you can keep it on the right corner.
Yeah. Am I better now?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. So their concern was that, are we going into the American embrace? Are we being targeted? So the Marxists were totally opposed. There were many elements in the ruling Congress before. So because the opposition wanted to use it mainly as a stick to beat the US. It's not that I don't know when you use the word stakeholder. I think the stakeholders are the people of India. I think the people of India would have welcomed it. So we got through the deal. I think across the world, I think it was acclaimed as one of the major achievements of any international negotiation of any kind. But like you're all in industry, the best of plans is over. Soon after, we got the deal because it took a long time. Even after we started in 2005, when finally signed at the end of 2008, 2009 was the fine tuning of many of these things. By the time 2010 happened, we had Fukushima happen. So there was a great deal of concern about nuclear again. Two, there was an issue of the insurance. Till then, almost all deals were oriented or supported or backed by governments. So the insurance didn't matter. The sovereign, all these sovereign guarantees of there. when private agencies, when the American part and the Japanese found that because the Westinghouse, etc., were industry buyer, they were very worried about what would be the demands later. Because as you see today, only 2 days ago, all those responsible for Fukushima were asked to pay some $95 billion kind of thing. So even those responsible for the equipment were to be held responsible. So that was the basic issue that came in. So the matter remained, I would say, debated amongst the lawyers and the industry specialists, etc. I think that they wasted 10 to 15 years because I think nuclear energy is certainly going to be the only way that India will become, I would say, free of all the problems that we have with nuclear energy.
So this means that there's still a lot more to be achieved out of that agreement.
The next step will be the private sector. It is possible for private sector. And in the visit between the Prime Minister of India and Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister of UK, again, that's a pity that now he'll go, I don't know who. They have agreed that they will look at how to sort of use this better. And though I understand that the British government has set up an advisory council on that. Now, Rolls-Royce, for instance, has come out with, smaller nuclear than that. So many things are taking place. And nuclear will certainly go into the thorium cycle. It's a self-perpetuating thing. You don't have to worry about where you're going to get your nuclear fuel from. So I think may not happen. It certainly may not happen in my time. Certainly happen in your time.
We now move on to another major area that's occupying world stage today. The United Nations Security Council. Its job is to maintain peace and security throughout the world. Do you think that they have done whatever they need to do in terms of ensuring the war situation that's happening in Russia and Ukraine, which is one part? And on another part, India has taken a strong stand on what they want to do. Do you think India's stand is justified in terms of fueling the Russian economy, which in turn perhaps fuels the war?
You asked me two questions in one, so you have to give me extra minutes for that. The first question, I think the United Nations has failed. I know that I'm on YouTube. I say this with a full sense of purpose. I think the United Nations has no strength of its own, but the only capability it has is how do you negotiate problems and all. So we certainly don't have today people at the top who have the capacity to manage. I think this is a crisis that could have been managed. But because I think the West is so determined to sort of ensure that Russia is punished in some way or the other, I don't think the United Nations has been able to play its part. And I think the United Nations Secretary, who has the main responsibility, has performed the role that he should. I'm sorry to have to say that. I think I've written about it also. But maybe I'm unfair to him. So as far as UN is concerned, on the issue of how India should look at it, there are no absolutes in international politics or geopolitics. There are some things where there are treaties which should be sort of carved in stone, but are then changed. In 1991, there was a clear understanding that NATO would not be, the limits of NATO would not be extended beyond a particular part at that point. Since then, that has been violated, has been done by the West. No nation, no country, no one in the world would accept that what Russia did going into Ukraine is correct. All that you have to say is that there are what we call extenuating circumstances provoking. Mr. Putin, of course, is not the world's greatest statesman. He's almost like a futurist. He's a writer. I met him, and I even claim to know him because I've discussed my 5 years as the NSA. I met him more than half a dozen times. He's always cut and dry. Back. I think this is one of the areas in which India has played a role. We should have not more, I feel, but certainly we pick sort of better taking sides. It's easy, for instance, I'm no longer the heartbeat of things. I can say many things. if I'm sitting in the chair, the most important thing is to how do you end the conflict in Ukraine? Because it's a human tragedy, it's a humanitarian tragedy. You are allowing people to die, and it's possible to stop it if the nations and the leaders of these nations are willing to. But they have different ideas. I mean, the West wants to crush Putin, and certainly the United States wants the US and NATO to become the dominant player. I think the era of what the immediate leading up 1991, that's not going to be. So there are all things going on. I think India has maintained a certain equality approach. And let me tell you, I've been in this for a very long time. I've done nearly 65 years or so. Russia is a good friend of ours, I must say, many other countries have not. So sometimes we do have to side with our friends. And I have been through in 1962, in 1971, and everything. When the world did not look at us, the Russians stood by us. So we also have a certain commitment towards Russia. As I said, we do not condone the attack. Clearly, I don't see any particular advantage in saying, oh, Russia is a did. We should have played a more active role in doing that. Probably we didn't. We're not given the space to do that. I don't know about that because I'm not. But clearly, condemning condemning Russia is not the answer to the ending of the Ukraine crisis.
Yesterday's news was interesting, where the US Congress has waived sanctions on India for purchasing equipment from Russia. That's a big move. And the US Congress realizes that India has to protect itself. So that again perhaps adds to the geopolitics that we've spoken about so far.
Yes, to some extent, because fortunately in this case, we are on India and US on the same side, with China. Therefore, the geopolitics is the art of the possible. So that's what we're really trying to do. I think what we've done. I mean, today we are a much more powerful country in terms of both economic power, military strength, and whatnot. I'm talking the years in my fledgling years when I was in service, when we were one of my tasks was to ensure when the PL-480 ships would land and would come to Bombay docks or Gujarat docks or whatever it is, because we had so. From that, even at that time, we were able to negotiate the Korean crisis. So we have that capability. Therefore, we need to we have, in a sense, a place or position in the world on geopolitics. It has nothing to do with individual things, but I think India as a concept is a very important country.
So that brings us to the end of the first section of our discussion, which was on your expertise. We now move on to the second section, which is our guests' organization and their role within the organization. Mr. Narayanan, the director of IB has always been an IPS officer. Is this because only IPS officers are equipped with the skills needed for the job? And what skills do you think that might be? Also, what issues affect performance of an IB officer? During your tenure, have you faced any of these issues?
Yeah. This is the question that agitates many people. Why should the director of the IB or why should intelligence be in many ways the close preserve of the Indian police service? Much of it is an accident of history. Like everything else, why should the IAS officer be the secretary of a ministry? This is a question that people do ask. Not that there are not, but there are structures that you need. All organizations. The Indian, as I said, the Intelligence Bureau in India is an extension of what was once known as the Thuggi Daftar. The biggest threat that we had before all the modern day terrorists were the thugs, who, all across central India, they held the country to ransom. So there was a man called Sleeman, who was then the head of that department, the Thuggi Daftar. Even now in many of the Almirans, etc., you will find Thuggi Daftar such and such. So Sleeman was a man who ended the Thuggi menace using it. He was headed by the police, whatever police forces were existing. They were all disparate police forces. So, in a sense, the Intelligence Bureau and the concept of intelligence, but it required a lot of intelligence to handle the thugs. Intelligence was then structured to look after the problems of mostly Central India at that time. So that's how so the Intelligence Bureau was, in a sense, an extension of the department dealing with thugs. Many of those who were involved in that work were all police officers, and therefore when the IB got its structure, the IB had mainly police officers. And that became an area of specialization of the police. It can be, and let me tell you, it's not, there's not only IPS officers, we have people from a variety of people. But it so happens that all of us, and since I'm a beneficiary of that, it is what we call a protected post in the Constitution. That the post of the DIB will always be held by an IPS officer. So if you put somebody else in the DIB, you will not get his pay. The simple matter of that. So that is the part. And since May, because the Intelligence Bureau basically is dealing with internal intelligence and border intelligence. It had certain external implications I think they expanded. But therefore, the IB became part of the extension of the Indian Police Service, and therefore the director of the IB always became an IPS officer. And the DIB is the senior most police officer in the country. There were 4 stars in the police, where all the others are 3 stars.
What was the need for the creation of the National Counter-Terrorism Center and the National Intelligence Grid?
There's no national government. There's no NCTC. It is an idea who's just quoted by someone whom you know, but it didn't go forward. Because it's a fancy concept. We may or may not have. We don't have an NCTC. Basically, deal with counter-terrorism kind of thing, but we have several other structures which are present. So the NCT does not. The National Intelligence Grid is really a linkaging of all, because individual organizations, the state police forces, etc., state intelligence organizations, they all have come together on a common grid. So we have a common grid. We don't have to go through various varieties of grids. So that's it.
The former chief, Mr. Hormus Tarakan, pointed out, quote, RAW, which is the Research and Analysis Wing, was created from scratch and went on to reach rare heights. An important factor in that rapid rise was the personality of the founding fathers and the rapport they enjoyed with the political leadership, unquote. Do you feel this still continues? Has the organization evolved significantly in order to be able to deal with all the threats and challenges that they face?
Always a whole lot of things. I think it's very important. Can I continue?
Yeah, please.
It's very important for the head of the IB, even more than the head of the RLW, to have the total and absolute confidence of the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers, at least the main cabinet minister, because between what we call pure intelligence and a little more of that, there's a great deal of what I would call commonality. And it's important to be for the DIB to be able to tell the Prime Minister that I think that Mr. So-and-so, who is your closest friend and ally, is really undesirable person because of reason X, Y, Z kind of stuff. Or that he's up to no mischief. Or that there are threats of various things that are kind of there, which may not be. So, in the case of the RNW, Mr. Rao was very close to Mrs. Down, Mrs. Dara. The second Indian.
Please go ahead.
Second Indian director. The first was a man from Tamil Nadu, Sanjeev Pillai. He had a fallout with the Home Minister. Second was Mr. Nian Malik, who also had an excellent appointment in there. I would like to say that I was there I dealt with 5 prime ministers, and I had a very good rapport with almost all of them, some exceptions, Rajiv Gandhi in particular. So Chandrasekhar, Mr. Narasimha. So you can't really function without that. But that doesn't mean that that's the only quality that you should have. You must use it. You have to produce the kind of information and intelligence that you generate. But without that, you may have Excel, but you don't have access, and you have to go to A, B, and C before the private strategy was.
Our next question is from the audience, Mr. Arunachalam, who's chair of our of SICCI's insurance committee. Mr. Arunachalam, if you're online, please go ahead. And if you can please also turn on your video.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Arunachalam. Good afternoon, Mr. Narayanan and President Mr. Arun. Am I audible, sir?
Your connection is little.
Am I audible now, sir? Am I audible?
You're breaking up, Mr. Arunachalam. Please.
How about now, sir?
Yeah, better.
Yeah. Good afternoon, Mr. Narayanan. My question is on this. You mentioned about the game of impossible, about China. Our relationship, whatever has happened in the past, I think we completed 2 years since Galwan clashes, June 2020. So your perspective on how this India-China relationship should go? We keep fighting forever, both in Ladakh and Arunachal Pradesh. What should be the outlook for our relationship with China? They are a neighbor whom we cannot ignore. We have to be always on the guard. So you can throw some light on what should be India's strategy towards China?
I think we should have an entire session on this. If Arun would permit, I am quite willing. This is my favorite subject in any case. But if you are asking me to give an answer in 2 minutes, I would say that China, of course,
Yeah, we can hear you.
China is a country that we can't quite trust. But having said that, I would say that's largely true of many countries. The whole great thing is trust but verify applies to China more than to any other country. But having said that, I would say that while we have a problem with China on the border, and we need to be very careful as to how we deal with that problem on the border, especially so considering that much of the border, the very large areas of the border are undefined. And it's very difficult to decide whether they are all entirely within our territory or not, because we always took a very peaceful approach to these issues. While China is very good producing maps of various kinds of various dynasties. We need to ensure that there is a great deal that we need to ensure peace on the border. We should avoid the kind of situation that happened in Galwan in 2020. And I would say one reason to ensure that kind of peace is to ensure that we don't have a major conflict with China. And I don't think we have major problems with China. And I do think that Galwan was probably part of China's method of trying to teach India a lesson for being seen going closer to the United States and therefore acting in some way as a proxy. But in the short answer to your question, Mr. Arunachalam, is that we have to live with China. India and China are the two most prominent nations in Asia. Probably in the next decade, we will be the most prominent nations in the world. We have to maintain a certain level of peace. Chinese are in many ways concerned about India, because India is a nation, not India's friends in the they just cannot understand our beliefs in religion. They do not understand Indian music. It's a civilization issue. India and China are the two major civilizations that still exist from the past, and there is a conflict of civilization. How to manage the civilization is the biggest challenge for the leadership of both countries. I think we have a more mature leadership in our country than what is present in. I leave it at that because I think but I hope I made my position clear.
Mr. Narayanan, I hope I can take you up on your offer of having a session dedicated to this.
I don't know.
We now move on to the third section, which is on your career path. Whom or what would you say?
I think this is much more interesting than my career has been now. Anyway.
Whom or what would you say inspired you to enter the civil services? Did you yourself have any goals as a young officer, and do you think that you've achieved them? Also, you've mentioned to me that you were training on the border as part of your overall training process. That would have definitely been an adrenaline rush. It'll be nice to hear about that.
Again, three questions into one. Yeah. You know, when we were young, still young, and because my parents were in Delhi, joining the civil services was an accepted. You could achieve and enter it. And those days, the Indian civil service, etc., was still there, and they were living in a world of their own. So aspirations were always there to join one of the civil services. It didn't matter very much what you were, but naturally you would talk of the IAS and the IPS as the All India services and the Foreign Service as the other All India service. So that's how you prepare for it when you will take your subjects. And my own preference was for mathematics, which was my favorite subject. But it was felt that economics was a better subject than mathematics or civil service. So that's how you get into it. That's what inspires you to. Then you've achieved what I think you are lucky you achieve. It's nothing to do with your. I don't think nothing, but it's not much to do with your capacity. It's not only your capacity. But lucky. I think in some ways, I've had a career which I think is quite. I mean, I entered the Indian Police Service. I went to the Interior Bureau, which is one of the favored organizations in the government. I could interact with leaders across the board in India, and earlier, at a very early stage, I went on to head the organization. I head the Indian Police Service, at the head of the IB. Then I retired, came back, and went back as the special advisor to the Prime Minister, National Security Advisor. So, I mean, in terms of what ordinary mortals say as a career, I've achieved much more than I ever anticipated, if I might say so.
As Director IB, there are two major organizations that report on to the DIB. One is, of course, the Intelligence Bureau, and the second one is RAW, the Research and Analysis Wing. There has been a lot that has been spoken about in terms of the turf war between these two organizations.
And the question you said, DIB? No, you said Director IB.
Director IB.
No, that's not correct. Director IB looks after only the IB. RNW is an entire.
I'm sorry. I take that back. The NSA, the National Security Advisor. Thank you for correcting me.
Yeah.
As NSA, two organizations report on to you, IB and the RAW. So we've heard a lot about turf wars between these two organizations, which is RAW and IB. Has this ever slowed down the process of intelligence or important areas where the country takes a backseat?
I don't think it's proper to say that the IB and the RNW report to the NSA. The structure of the government of India is that the IB functions under the Home Ministry, and therefore you technically report to the Home Ministry, that is the Home Minister, who is the head of the IB. Peculiar feature of the DIB is that the DIB has access to the Prime Minister, and I mean, he does not have to go through the Home Minister or through ABNC. He has direct access to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has direct access. Prime Minister can call him without that. And he has a range of responsibility beyond the mere intelligence aspects. Likewise, in the case of the RNW, in theory, the Prime Minister is the minister, and the reporting is to the Cabinet Secretariat, etc. So, but what the NSA did, the NSA was created because it was felt that it required an agency which would look after not merely intelligence aspects, but coordinate all these things. So, particularly when the NSA is a former intelligence man, then naturally the IB and the RNW gravitate much more to me, because I know much more about what is happening, except all my successor once removed as a dual. they understand. So it's much easier for them to come to talk to you about a matter, etc. So it's not, I think it would be improper to say that they report. They report this, that is how the structure is. The Home Secretary reports to the Home Minister, the DIB reports to the Home Minister, etc. etc. But unlike many of the secretaries or any other departments or heads, for instance, they all report, they do not have access beyond their ministry. The DIB and the RNW have referred, in the case of RNW, the minister, Prime Minister is the ministerial person. So that's how it is. So that is the first part. The second part you were about turf wars. Turf was an inevitable in a system. You know, the RNW was carved out of the IB in a sense. So there was a certain amount of friction that came out of it. Mr. Kao had at that time closer access to the Prime Minister than the head of the IB at that time, Mr. Puja. So there was a certain amount of friction. Come down. There are inevitable turf wars. I mean, I'm quite sure in the business world also you have turf wars between etc. So I don't think, but I must say that I don't think that really affects the cooperation. The tremendous amount of cooperation between the two agencies. Much of the failure is not because of turf wars, but as I said, actually the RNW was providing a fair amount of information in 2008 attack. But that was not enough. So it's not really turf wars. It's the human beings that have kind of something. And also a certain amount of rivalry. The DIB is important for a Prime Minister because Rajiv Gandhi said, "Oh, taja khabar bata." He gives fresh news. So when you go to cabinet meeting, you will ask the DIB to speak because the DIB gives you a flavor of something which is not present somewhere. So that happens.
Our next question is from the audience again. It's from a student, Ms. G. Varsha, who's doing her biotech first year at SPC. Varsha, if you're online, please go ahead. And if you can please turn on your video.
Yes, good evening, sir. First of all, I'm thankful for having this opportunity. So my question for you is that you have mentioned several times about the values your father has taught you. Can you share with us the importance, sir?
I think my father instilled the same value that every father instills on his child, that you must have a sense of the most important thing in life is to have a sense of values, because everything else is ephemeral. I mean, it comes and it goes. So it doesn't matter, you may achieve here, you may achieve that, but if you don't have values. Now, sometimes it's also a matter of what the circumstances. I really never had a major, what should I say, conflict in which I had my value system conflicted with what I had to do. I mean, for 5 years. It's a pleasure to work with a man like him because he never asked you to do something which you are not. And if you had a great sense of values, I think I also had a great sense of values. There is no conflict. And it so happens that once you have a reputation that you have a sense of values, most prime ministers do not. And right. I dealt with, of course, Mrs. Indira Gandhi. Though I not dealt with DI. For some reason, she took a fancy to me, and so. But a lot of things I said about Mrs. Indira Gandhi. She never asked me to do anything which I thought conflicted with my sense. Somebody will say, "Oh, you were very close to her, therefore you must be bad about her." Maybe I'm bad, but I don't know. So likewise, it's a matter. You have values, try to keep to it. Don't throw those values in somebody else's face. That's what I would. You don't have to tell anybody I'm the most honest man going, I'm the most man with the best values in the world, and you irritate people. So I think what you need is values plus tact more than anything else. Hope I've answered your question, Varsha.
Yes, sir, you did, sir.
You've been kind enough to share with us several pictures. And I must say that each one of the pictures that you've shared, I'm sure has a story to itself. And we've taken the opportunity to share all the pictures with our audience in the course of this conversation. If at all you feel you should share anything from your side on any particular picture, please feel free to to do so.
I mentioned about number one second. We go back to, I like some of the.
Maybe we can go forward, we'll go
Forward
forward,
and backward. whichever you-
we'll go along with the questions.
Now, take this gentleman, he is the king of Bhutan. The king of Bhutan, we known as K5 in the system, K4 is his father. You talk of values, he's an amazing person all the time. I mean, and if he was a true friend of India, it is his father. Of all our neighbors, I think they are the truest friend of India. And K4, his father was mentored by Mrs. Gandhi and Co. And I think to this day, I mean, I've not met him for some years now, but right through the period that I dealt with him, came through that whatever happens in friendship and Bhutan's links with India will be, and the son does exactly the same. So I think it's important to have connections with countries based on a value system. This is very important.
That actually takes us into a very apt question that we have for you. It also takes us into the next section, which is the next generation. You have stated, Mr. Narayanan, quote, China's taking over of Hambantota port in Sri Lanka, also the Gwadar port in Pakistan, and setting up a naval base in Djibouti in Africa, and intent to increase such presence will only lead to worsening of relations between China and India, unquote. When a neighbor, while you say that Bhutan has been an excellent friend, but when you have a neighbor who's taking such stands against you, what exactly should we do as a country in order to safeguard ourselves?
Did I quote, where did you get this quote from? I'm not sure, it's not contrary to what I think, but I don't know where you got the quote from.
Got it from, we do a lot of research work on each of our guest speakers, and this was something that came across.
This is part of what I would call my, right, something you have a,
Rough notes.
not contract, what is it? So I expect payment for your quotation.
But I'll get you the source of this, where we got it from.
When you said quote, must have written in some article this particular point. Look, the point you make, when you say that, but I would like, since you give me the opportunity, let me expand it. Really, as I said, there are really speaking, there are only two real nations in Asia, at least from Chinese point of view. The Chinese see only India as well. Others are all of no consequence. I spent hours, particularly with David Lowe, my talked about 60 countries, either the Foreign Minister. So it's then there is only one country in Asia that they have any vision. Japan, yes, to some extent, but I think to some extent they're concerned about India because they don't understand Indian civilization. It's a parallel civilization with the Chinese, but there are so many factors. I mentioned they just can't understand how it's so different and so disparate, and they're very well. That's why when they have the Falun Gong, they crushed it as if it is like a mosquito. So what they want to do is to reduce the space they give. I don't think they're interested in conquering India. They're trying to reduce India to an insignificant nation. So that's what they're trying to do. On the border, they're creating problems. Djibouti is on the horn of Africa, so they can try to sort of ensure that they have a base there, so the Straits of Hormuz and etc. But everywhere they're trying to sort of anyway, something similar to it. So that's what we are. Now we have to, how do we manage this? We don't want a conflict. We don't want to, India does not want a conflict with any nation given itself. So this is where diplomacy becomes a very important. So I think we need to look at these issues. We need to strengthen our diplomatic capability. But I think we need to not to be seen as identified with others who are there. I mean, I for one feel that the Quad, for instance, is not in our interest. Maybe have its uses, but I don't know. Because whatever then is done, it's all saying, well, you're all part of the US fund, the Australians, the Japanese, etc. So we have a conflict with China, and that will remain irrespective of what happens elsewhere. I don't know how we resolve that. Because after the Greek and the Roman and all the Western empires, there are only two nations and two empires that live standing, that's the Indian and the Chinese. So, just because we have something Djibouti doesn't mean that we should get into this. But the fact that we need to keep in mind, how do we deal with the situation? How do we ensure that we reduce the impact of what that is? This is the way that
Our next question is scheduled from our audience, and he's not available.
Yes, yes.
Okay. The next question, Mr. Narayanan, is do you think making a stint in military compulsory for our youth, will it assist our country? And what role do you think youth play in national security?
I don't know about military, but I think we had an NCC. It certainly instills a sense of discipline. And many countries, take Singapore, but it's a small country called paramilitary service. I think we need something, I don't want to use the word military in that sense, but something like the NCC. It's important bringing a sense of discipline to the world. We need a country of this size to really require discipline. We need that, but you don't want a straitjacketed thinking, because I think the greatness of India in the years that I've had, no one has ever said something critical of India's abilities. Somebody may say you're black or you're brown or your food habits are bad, your family, etc. They all see it. They all are very, 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 what should I say, favorably inclined to the way we think. Quite unlike what they think about many other. So, I think we don't want straitjacketed thinking, but we need a certain amount of discipline. So to that extent, I feel we should get what we used to have the UOTC in the old days when we were in college, now it's the NCC. I think we need that. I think NCC is wrong. I'm not very sure whether it exists or not. But
Actually, when I was going to school, there were two things that started slowly going away. One was moral science. Moral science used to be a subject in school, and today you don't find it in any school, any curriculum. And the second one, of course, is that of the NCC. The NCC is also diluted to a very large extent. We now move on to the last section, which is your society inputs. We have another student, Mr. Surya Prakash. He's doing his first year at SICCI in electronics and communication. Mr. Surya Prakash, if you are online, please turn on your video and go ahead. Mr. Surya Prakash? Is he online, Bhavani? Shall we move on?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Mr. Narayanan, do you think any country will ever use nuclear weapons? And if no country will ever have the guts, if I can say that, to do so, why do we at all have to have nuclear weapons or wanting to develop it as well?
nuclear weapons are an insurance. Ukraine is a classic example. Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons under the promise that their security would be protected. And you've seen what has happened. Very clearly, if Ukraine had nuclear weapons, I think Russia would have hesitated. I still feel Russia was provoked into this, but irrespective of that, I think invading another country is an act of war. But they would not have done that had Ukraine retained its nuclear weapons. And we went nuclear. I was involved at various stages in this. Essentially because we suddenly found 1964 when China carried out its first nuclear test. We should have been present in India. I mean, you were not born, I suppose. Were you born in 64?
No.
No. You've seen the impact that it had. You had China. And at that time, China and Russia were also allies. The Americans, whatever they may say, how profoundly friendly they are with us today, were certainly not friends in this. They all look down upon you. You were dependent on them for PL480 and lenses and all that stuff. So nuclear weapons are a great insurance against what I call aggression, other nations. And if we did not have nuclear weapons in China and Pakistan nuclear weapons, we can imagine our states. So I think in that sense, I don't think any nation will again, up to Japan, actually use nuclear. But you require influence. To some extent, like having a former suitable security for your office or your residence. You need a sense of security. That's what nuclear weapons are.
Indian intelligence agencies today appear to be top heavy with male leadership. We don't find too many women there. Is there any reason for this? And how can women be groomed to join these agencies and perhaps even lead?
You're on YouTube, otherwise I have an answer for this. See, our realize the government follows a structured policy. You just don't bring in somebody from outside. I mean, there are brilliant people outside the system who could possibly help you. But as I said, the IB is to some extent the preserve of the police. I mean, we have nearly 30 to 40% of non-police officers. We have army officers, we have civil servants, all of them. They are, when you say top heavy, because after all these are services now that have been serviced, mostly during those days, most of the civil servants were males. The number of civil, I mean, in the case of IPA, Kiran Bedi was the first lady. She came in the 70s. So when you're talking of the DIB, and in my case, there was no lady anywhere near the, so I didn't have it is not mine how good I was vis-a-vis what shall that lady was there. It's a question is they're not enough. I think it's only a matter of time that young, because I think now the IB has at least at the top levels nearly 2020. One of them, I think maybe 2 or 3 years we may get somebody who's there. In any case, I think this debate which is going on all the time when women are not there and here, etc. I think there's a lot of it based on, there is part of what is called a regular progression of how people go to these jobs. In government service has its own. When I entered service, in some ways, it was then even earlier. It was there was almost a 95% assurance that I'd end up where I was because I was the youngest in my batch, top of the batch, etc., etc. So you kind of think. So there was a lady ahead of me. She would have been the IB. So it's not that we are kept out ladies. I don't see how we can ever keep them out now.
At the ripe young age.
Do you know who that lady is? First lady president. Pratibha Patil.
Yes. At the ripe young age of 88 that you are today, you are occupying an executive role. You are executive chairman of a cybersecurity company.
He's doing that not too well, because I'm sure you. Okay.
This is a very important industry, I would say, in today's context where so much is evolving on data, so much involves data, and so many devices are at risk. Cybersecurity is a major issue that people have to be paying attention to. There are several of our installations, whether it's public installations or our businesses as well, that are getting affected with cyber attacks. And it's only going to be growing further. In fact, one of the major threats that I, in fact, asked the defense minister directly is that more than 50% of our smartphones that we use in India are Chinese brands. And that's a huge security risk. And they know that they have that in the radar screen.
Even more so, all our routers in the defense ministry are all coming from China. So
are we prepared for this? Are we
speaking in my role, if I can do some propaganda for what I'm trying to do, certainly. I mean, I don't want to mention the company. It's a very important company in our country who, when we were trying to explain to them the dangers, said we shut off our computers at night and therefore will not need attack. So that's a kind of thing that take place at pretty high levels. or Anderson. The role that I really do as executive chairman is because given my past, talk in terms of the cyber threat more than the actual cyber technology. I think we are not able to convey to people that it's not a question of ransomware and paying out a few thousand rupees or few access rupees, etc. But may be crippled as a result of this. We need to ensure that this does not happen. And they don't know that the hospital records, they are being manipulated in many ways. Particularly because people don't go to a doctor, they have all been followed, deal with documents which are all digital. Manipulation is going on. I don't think any hospital does any work on it. So there is a great deal to be done. But it costs money. So the question is, I'm sorry to say, people in business think that money is not merely the cause for all evil, but also a cause for all success. So I think we run into this problem very, very, very often. They always say, I can use that. It's not a question of using product A or product B. Comprehending what will take place. It's not that we're going to have a cyber Pearl Harbor and one major attack will take. No. I think I wrote an article in the Hindu. I think we need to look at where the extent to which Ukraine has used cyber to stall to some extent the Russian attack on this country. It's not come out anywhere. Nobody, the West does not want to talk about it. So, therefore, there are pluses and minuses in this whole. So we need to be aware of the potential of cyber threat, and it's good. There are some positives that are not more like negatives.
I think we have time for one more question, Mr. Narayan.
I'm a man of leisure.
This question stems from the fact that SICCI has an excellent presence in the aerospace and defense industry, and we are trying to encourage that because of Tamil Nadu being one of the 2 upcoming defense corridors that's been announced in our country. So we are doing everything that we can to encourage aerospace and defense. There are several small satellite revolutions that are impacting security in space, outer space. The speed at which commercial companies are putting thousands, soon to be tens of thousands of satellites into orbit, presents a unique challenge for Indian security in space. We've spoken a lot about China. With China taking the lead with space, what can we do to ensure our competitiveness and our security is taken care of?
I think in this it's really a question of how much we're willing to spend. Because I think in terms of our intrinsic ability, I think we are almost unmatched. I mean, then only the Chinese probably have something like that. And it's really a question of how much are you people, the industry, willing to do in this matter? How much the government is willing to do in a matter? And far more of what people like me should be able to do is to highlight in a manner that will make people spend money on it. What is the nature of the threat? It is really understanding the nature of the threat which will make people who spend the money. As I said, it's not been possible to do that in cyber, though it's now almost staring you in the face. But I think this is important. And I don't think we require technology. I think we have enough technology. In any case, the technology we develop elsewhere, all of them being done by Indians. There are only Chinese. My son is a scientist, IBM, and he said in his lab, 70 to 75% are either Chinese or Indians or Koreans and what. So the manpower or the intellectual potential is tremendous. We have it. None of these present a problem, excepting are you willing to see the potential and are you willing to put the money where the danger of the threat lies.
Mr. Narayan, thank you very much. That's been a very nice discussion that we've had. Very patiently answered each one of the questions. And as I said earlier, I'm going to take your offer to have another session with you, specifically focused on some of these topics that are of interest to you, with your permission.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't think the audience will agree with that, but nevertheless.
We will have a face-to-face audience for that rather than having it online. And I'm sure that it would be beneficial.
Of course, I don't like these online discussions anyway.
Thank you very much again. As part of the format of SICCI 360, we have with us photographs of yourself that we would like to request you to kindly autograph so that we can store it with a memorabilia. I can hand it out to you, and we would like you to autograph it along with your along with today's date as well. Here's a pen.
Can I take this one?
Yes. So shall we remove?
For the audience benefit, we'd like to show the photographs. It's also on your screen. Please. Yes. Today is July 15, 2020. Thank you very much. Yes, we showed it. This is for the audience benefit. Thank you very much, Mr. Narayanan. Also, as a token of our appreciation for having joined us this evening, we would like to hand over to you a certificate. This certificate is from the Kanchi Kamakoti Child's Trust Hospital, which is based in Nongambaka, and they provide service to children from underprivileged families. So we've taken the liberty to contribute in your name to the hospital so that the money can be used for the medical expenses of an underprivileged child. And the hospital has given this certificate to us. I would like to hand it over to you. Thank you very much, Mr. Narayanan. It was very nice having you with us. I would like to, yes, this is something new that our SICCI 360 committee has come up with, and we've been doing this as part of the SICCI 360 series. I would now like to take the opportunity to also thank a few others who have assisted us. In particular, Mr. Gopal Krishna Gandhi for having assisted us with today's session. Mr. Gopal Gandhi has been one of our guests to SICCI 360, and he is a former administrator, diplomat, and governor. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank our SICCI 360 committee. It is chaired by Mrs. Valli Arun, who is president of the Wellingrove Group, and the co-chair is Professor T. Murugavel, who is head of the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at SBC Chennai. This committee has been doing an excellent job. It is because of this that we've been able to conduct 22 excellent sessions month on month without any break. And certainly like to take this opportunity to thank each one of them for the good work that they've been doing. I would also like to share with you that the next SICCI 360 session has been scheduled. This is session 23. It's been scheduled with Mr. Vijay Amritraj, who's an Indian tennis legend. He's a Hollywood actor rather, and also a motivational speaker. This is tentatively scheduled for 4:30 p.m. on Thursday, August 25th. We will send you the confirmation as soon as we receive it. So please mark your calendars and kindly join us for this session as well. That brings us to an end of today's program. We would like to thank our esteemed guest for today, Mr. M.K. Narayanan, as well as each one of our audience for having taken the time to participate along with us. We certainly look forward to your ongoing participation with us. And I would like to take this opportunity to wish each one of you safe times ahead. Thank you. Nandri. Vanakkam.